go. All right, it is 6:30 on June 9th, 2022. This is the Transportation and Transit Commission, and our meeting will come to order. First, roll call. I'm Bill Horns, I'm here. Michael Ladoucet.
Yeah, I'm here.
Got close anyway, is here, thank you. Rich Tate is excused. Michael Granetsky is online, thank you. Elizabeth Ward is excused. And Jason Strauss is excused. And Gabriella Gerhardt is here. So we have a quorum of 4. Are there any public appearances on non-agenda items? There's nobody in this room and apparently nobody online, so we'll assume that there are none. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
All right, I'll move to approve.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I wasn't there at the last
Oh,
meeting, so I
okay.
think I'll abstain from this vote. Is maybe Michael? I'll second it.
All right, thank you. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the
And I'll
agenda is...
abstain, just since I wasn't there.
And Gabriella will abstain. Approval of minutes. That's one that we need a motion to approve.
I can move to approve that too.
Micah moves to approve. Michael, can you second that for us?
Oh, we were doing the agenda last time.
I guess not, but you don't want to second it. I'll say, can I second?
No, I think Michael said second.
Oh, did he say?
I think it was quiet, but yeah.
Oh. Okay, minutes have been, motion to approve and has been seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. Want to thank, by the way, on that subject, Andrew for thorough accounting of our discussion. Review items. Overview of proposed parking ordinances. Andrew, I'll turn it over to you for that.
Sure, thank you. So we talked about this a little bit before, and I think 2 or 3 meetings ago, and I mainly want to bring it up in context with this proposed, it's not directly related to this proposed action item, but I thought it was a good time to kind of remind folks about it, knowing that it's likely going to come to TTC next meeting. And so just to kind of reiterate that at the end of January, the city held a public meeting on parking policy. The video's out there if you'd like to check it out. And specifically, one of the outcomes from that is to try to redefine some of what we do with our parking ordinance. Currently there's roughly 34 specific locations identified as prohibited parking. Some are as short as 30 feet, some are overlapping, and then some are designated by signs but aren't necessarily represented in ordinance, so they're not enforceable. So there's kind of a hodgepodge of different things. So one thing that we are looking to do is, as part of that effort, we basically came up with a parking area map. I can kind of share my screen. So I'll try to keep it brief, but a lot of this is review, but I guess I just want everybody to be aware of it for next time. But so,
just to, sorry to interrupt, but when you say parking ordinance, these are just, we're looking at ideas or suggestions. There's no formal ordinance.
there's no formal ordinance yet. Yeah, that'll come next month.
Okay.
Yep. But so this basically shows, so this is a web map, I can share it with folks. This shows the 34 that are currently included in ordinance. And so there's a number of different types of policies here. So I can kind of show the legend. There's prohibited, which is the red, but there's some other ones, mainly school-related restrictions, kind of by time of day. in this area, kind of by the schools. And I think that was specifically related, that was before my time, but related to kind of getting safe routes to school, walking to school and back. So I'll just kind of note that, this has been done so far. The next step is basically to come up with a proposed map to talk to council about. But I think the general intention is to move to a map-based format where smaller zones could be designated by the city or the city engineer, and larger zones would still go through a more formal process, but they'd be added to a map instead of individual lines of text. And so that's what we're working on. And so I'm happy to kind of take questions and talk through some of the details before you guys see the full ordinance change next time. And I can bring up the ordinance.
Just to clarify for the public too, that city map, that is available on the city website for viewing, is that correct?
I believe we posted it in relation to the public meeting, but I'm not sure if it's just on a web page on. So I can definitely add it if that's helpful.
Yeah,
The general map is out there. This layer isn't included in that general map,
got
so
it.
then this would be a kind of separate web map that I could share for folks.
Great.
But yeah, the intention is you make it map-based, you tie that to signage so that people, while they're parking, can clearly see the sign by the side of the road, understand that, parking is prohibited there, but then also have this reference online that if there is any question of whether or not something is prohibited, they'll have that resource. And this is kind
Andrew,
of...
going to the map base, is it going to be a problem for enforcement? Because obviously an ordinance without enforcement does nobody any good.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, part of our ordinance right now is that we're supposed to have an official traffic map. We don't currently have that, at least not publicly accessible. And so this is, I guess, the first layer to add towards that. I believe there's 6 or so other, there's through highways, there's speed limits. There's several other layers to kind of add towards this. But I think the intention is to create one web map that's kind of the official traffic map in the long term that would be enforceable, right? I mean, certainly we'd have signage out in the field, but
And just, sorry to interrupt again, but on the, when you're showing the map, there was not a glossary, but a guide of what the different colors mean.
Yep.
Is part of the discussion to change any of those? In other words, those are kind of types of restrictions is what those seem to amount to. Is that part of, I'm just curious if that's in the mix of creating different definitions or simplifying the list or anything like that?
Yeah, and I've been primarily focused on prohibitions, but you could certainly have in the future cases 2-hour only, that sort of policy. All those could be added, and so that would be kind of a one-stop shop for parking related items.
Okay.
Whatever the parking policy on the street is, it would be represented in this map. I will say very small segments like 4 feet from driveways, 10 feet from hydrants, 15 feet from crosswalks. Anything that's statutorily in effect, I wouldn't include here. Those get really small and unwieldy, and we can just kind of reference statutes for that.
Okay, so that would not be in the map, that would be just,
This would be anything in addition to
Something you
state
should know.
statutes. Yeah.
right?
And really, I mean, in context to this action item of, I think these things come up from time to time. The next action item related to parking, this could be kind of an alternative way of, I guess I just want to offer it as a reference of, this is another way to go about changing parking policy that might reduce some of the administrative overhead that, we could do this administratively and kind of clear things up more quickly. And that might be more apparent when I talk about the next one. Yeah, any questions? Or just want to dig into it next time?
No, yeah, so I don't know, you weren't gonna go through, you gave us a bunch of slides and photographs, you weren't gonna walk through those.
I certainly could. Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, let me share my screen. I can jump through that. So, so as I mentioned, here's our map that I can send a link to. And then this was several of the examples that I talked about, myself and Lieutenant Hartwick talked about in January. And just, I included here just further background information, but, for example, what do yellow curbs mean? And so That would be nice to define. Those are very tricky, as we just found out in Sub-Zero Parkway, to remove once they're painted. So we're trying to phase those out, and generally we'll try to use those for places to reinforce the signage if it's particularly bad and folks are not
Okay.
compliant, or to just reinforce the state statutes of 4 feet from driveways, 15 feet from crosswalks. So that's kind of the idea there. The action item that we'll be talking about was specifically one of the areas of emphasis, and so that's why this is snowy. Same photo that wasn't used in the resolution. And specifically, we received this request, I believe, late last year, with some concern about not being able to travel through that area while still staying, within, to the correct side of the center line. And so this was one of the concerns. I think it was first brought up by a driver who felt like, the parking was unsafe, especially with the snow conditions. And then later this spring, it was brought up by a cyclist. So, and I can pull up a quick map just to kind of show people. So we'll be talking about this one with action item, but this was one of the ones that we're talking
Is that the same spot?
yeah, and that was just a street view of it.
Same car, there's snow melted and you never moved it?
I don't know if it was the same car. It might have been, I'm not sure. Another example is Sub-Zero Parkway. And so this one was actually just recently rectified or changed anyway. And so an issue that we were seeing here was that folks were parking on the north side just because some issues with basically parking spillover from the adjacent land uses. We've now changed basically the street and kind of narrowed things up so that there is now parking on the north side. So we kind of shifted everything south. And I can show a picture if you're interested.
Wait,
But
I'm mixed up. We're looking north.
we are looking west right now.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
So I can
Yeah,
just
it
back up.
intersects with
Okay.
Signal Highway.
okay.
So
Okay.
this is Sub-Zero Parkway as it was.
Okay.
So you can see it. There was some parking on the south side. There's not parking on the north side. And if I go back to the parking areas, just to kind of use this as a case study for how these things might change. In ordinance right now, it is parking prohibited on the south side of Sub-Zero Parkway for its extent. So obviously that's slightly different than what actually got installed. This was kind of the conflict, and so we did have folks parking in the bike lane on the north side, where we did have no parking signs installed, so you can kind of see. So this was, basically, I wasn't involved in this, but I think there was a conflict between what was in the design and what was actually included in ordinance, and so.
So right now, there's no parking on that bike lane?
It just changed today, so that's why it's a little
Today?
confusing.
Oh.
2 days ago, let's just say, this was the condition, and there were signs up, and it was not consistent with ordinance,
Oh,
but there was no parking bike lane signs adjacent to that parking, or
Okay.
adjacent to that bike lane, and people were parking in it. So we did fix this, and we're gonna now try to rectify it in ordinance, but we had this kind of apparent disconnect.
but I'm so confused. Today,
Yeah,
can I park in that bike lane?
you can park adjacent to that curb, which is no longer a bike lane.
Oh, it's not the bike lane?
So we were
is
able to
not-
shift some things around in this case, and so I can show a picture. Sorry to belabor this, I just thought it'd be useful. So this is a new picture, so you can see I kind of swing around, show you what it used to look like. So it used to look like this. So again, bike lane, travel lane, bike lane,
Right.
parking. Now, we shifted and we kind of condensed the road.
Oh.
So now things aren't much tighter out there, and we've done some, infield observations to make sure that, it's still
Yeah.
going to work. But now we've basically shifted that bike lane out so that there could be parking there.
Okay,
And so by doing that,
So,
yeah, Mike,
Andrew, it's funny you say that. I actually drove on this on the way home. I don't think people quite got that message yet. And I know that that'll take time to rectify, but from Seminole all the way to where that white car is, is pretty jam-packed with parking this afternoon.
sure, yep. So certainly once we get the signs in here reinforcing, So that sounds like it's fairly consistent with the problem that we've seen in the past when people were parking in the bike lane
Yeah.
here. Now I think basically the next steps are getting signage up there just to verify. We already have changed some of the signage, but get the final signage changed and then change it in ordinance so that it can be enforced.
And I know, I asked you this before the meeting started, but I'll ask you again. Why isn't it that there is simply no parking in bike lanes? I mean, why isn't it that simple?
Yeah, that's definitely a way to go. I believe that Milwaukee might have a law like that on their code of ordinance. It would be, one line in ordinance that would be parking is prohibited in bicycle lanes. And it could be a general ordinance. The other way, and basically how we've done in the past, and there are these counterexamples, but we, as the city puts in a bike lane, we typically restrict parking adjacent to that bike lane and post signs. So that would be both in ordinance and on the
Okay.
street.
Okay,
But in the places that we missed, like this, I think Seminole, north of Schumann, there's some other examples that, as these, or Oregon Road, where, maybe it's not an issue until a land use goes in, where there's parking spillover, and
yeah,
it becomes an issue. So that would solve it. I think another thing that could solve it would be, reducing the administrative overhead so that we can make these changes. If we miss it, we can add it later on. So I think there's a few different ones.
Is the reason the parking is sort of, people are parking in the bike lane because of the overflow at the Hop House? Is that the reason why? Because I assume there's enough parking for Sub-Zero employees in their parking lot, which it looks like. But the Hop House, obviously, the parking is somewhat limited and at a pretty big capacity
Yep.
building.
they must be doing good business in there.
It's usually pretty spillover. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I think in this specific example, yes. And I think initially there was some, you can back up and you see lots of surface parking lots here. I think initially the idea was that there'd be more opportunities for shared parking. I think that because of some incidents, Sub-Zero is kind of closed off. You can kind of see the gates in here already. Closed off their parking there. I believe that some of those assumptions about using a church parking lot also have not panned out. So I think, and I'm not exactly sure what the assumptions were on the parking ratio for gross square foot of retail at the Hop House, but I don't know if that necessarily included, the outside area as well.
Yeah.
And so, basically between that, all that, and I think there's a shared agreement as well with race day events, with this kind of shared parking. All that kind of compounds to an issue that, tragedy of the commons, it comes out onto the street. And I think, we've been working with owners there to try to, that's why we did this restructuring, to try to get 20 more I think there's 7 spaces existing. I think we added 10 on each side. Oh, sorry, 13. So now we're up to 20.
Okay, so interesting. Okay.
So that was, sorry, I digress. So, there's a number of different ways to solve these. Sometimes we have street width that we can shift things around, solve it that way. In other cases, we don't. And then, it kind of is a give or take, right? I think this one worked out, but
Okay.
yeah. Some other examples, for example, is Schumann up here, bike lane. If I were to zoom in here, you would see, we have a bike lane sign that says bikes and right turns only, but we don't have a parking prohibition.
Right.
And we also don't have a parking prohibition in ordinance. So that's a counterexample of where you would see a bike lane without that, so.
Without a sign and without any general, so it's actually it's legal to park right there.
As far as I
Right
know,
now.
yeah. I will say, and this is kind of in reference to the next item as well, that the Wisconsin Motors Handbook, so this is a guide, right, for folks. If you were to search or go to the parking section here, I'll just grab it. One thing that it does say is be sure you park far enough from any travel lane to avoid interfering with traffic. So you know, I think generally we should be focused on not blocking travel lanes, though specifically I don't have a specific state statute. I do not have a specific ordinance that would restrict.
So anyway, it highlights the need for clarification and
Yep, exactly.
some kind of action.
And just to continue through these examples, another one's Scarlet. So this is an example nearby. I can zoom out. So this, you know, again, this wasn't necessarily an issue until a street connection was made. So, you know, before this was a cul-de-sac, it just ended here.
Good.
Now the South Storm Prairie,
Yep.
or North Storm Prairie was added. And there's some concerns here about visibility with the
Yeah.
crosswalk. So, you know, right now, according to state statute, we can do 15 feet from the crosswalk, 4 feet from the driveway. If that's not sufficient, we would go to council to get a ordinance
Okay.
change. So,
Okay,
and I think that's all my examples.
all right.
Oh, and then there was one with mailboxes as well.
Yep.
So. And then I will say, you know, this was some information that we presented previously. Most cities around here do add specific line items for each parking zone. Madison is up to 691, so you can see, you know, it doesn't necessarily scale well, even though some jurisdictions are still doing that. La Crosse, I did recently find out that they have designated their Board of Public Works as their approval authority, and they don't list individual locations and just have their Board of Public Works approve that and then kind of keep that in-house. They don't have line items in ordinance. So lots of different ways to do it, I guess, and that we kind of offer this one possible solution. So that's all I have to say.
Okay, all right, thanks for the overview. And that brings us,
I guess I just have one note.
Oh.
It would be great to have, when we do finalize that map and when the ordinance references the parking map, it would be great to add that as a layer on that public
Yeah.
ArcGIS.
Yeah, for sure.
Just so that it's something easy to share, so people can reference it if they want to. And it seems now that we have our GIS specialist
Yeah,
in the
exactly.
city, we should be able to
Yep.
hopefully add things like that easily.
all right, thank you, Andrew. Now brings us to item 8, action item, ordinance 2022-021, and give us a thumbnail what that's about, if you don't mind, Andrew.
Sure. So this one was initiated by Alder J. Allen. He actually wrote the background material on the resolution. So unlike most things that I bring, you know, this is written by somebody else. But I did append a staff memo to that item. So to keep it clear of, you know, he wrote everything else. The staff memo was mine. And so, you know, basically I just kind of explained the history. And again, you know, this bike lane was installed roughly in 2011 when that street was reconstructed. It wasn't really an issue until 2020 when this new development went in, first with the construction vehicles, then with the, I'm assuming, renters or occupants there. And, you know, as I mentioned, we've had concerns, 2 concerns specifically to me. One, first by drivers, worried about having enough room to get around them, and then 2, by cyclists, worried about folks being parked in the bike lane. So I think this is just trying to reinforce the existing condition of on-street bike facilities on a roughly 33-foot street. And unfortunately, you know, we don't quite have enough width to do a parking lane and 2 bike lanes and 2 travel lanes. So in this case, it's kind of an either-or of, if you add parking, you'll be removing the bike lane.
So Mike Gronetsky raised a question, the phrase here, even though it is generally prohibited to park in a bike lane, and he asked that in an email. I don't know what the answer to the question. Mike, was that the question was, what does that mean, generally prohibited?
Correct.
Yep.
It-
Oh, I was just gonna ask, do we wanna, start motion?
We should get, we should.
And then I can definitely answer that. Yeah.
Okay, you're right, just a matter of procedure, we need a motion to adopt in a second, then we can talk about it. So, somebody like to move,
I move to approve ordinance 2022-021.
is there a second?
Yeah, second.
Second.
All right, thank you. So going back to
Yep.
Mike's question.
Yeah. And sorry, I always forget.
Yeah,
when
so just as a quick note, Andrew, Board of Public Works deferred this one because there were a lot of questions around the way that this was written. In the resolution, it says, currently parking is not specifically prohibited on this road, and there, blah, blah, blah. And then it kind of talks about generally prohibited. So the thought process is either it is or it isn't.
Mhm.
And, are we starting to go down the route of having these little areas carved out based upon one or two residents bringing this to their council member?
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point. So again, I didn't write the background on the referral sheet that specifically said that, and so I'm not exactly sure the intention of those words. I can understand that, as I kind of mentioned before, generally we discourage parking in travel lanes, but there's not a specific ordinance or state statute that restricts parking in a bike lane or a travel lane.
Okay, so, and I just want to be clear on this. So there isn't an ordinance that, or the image that you have there, there is not an ordinance prohibiting parking currently.
In bike lanes, yep, that's right.
Okay. Well, it may be discouraged. There is no ordinance, and that is a legal parking spot as of today.
Right. Yep, exactly. It is both a bike lane and a parking spot, which is an
Very good.
interesting. And I will note that there are treatments like that for special. When I worked in Denver, there was specialty land uses like churches where you might only have parking 2 hours out of the week. You could basically sign both with the intention of there's rarely going to be conflicts. But in this particular land use, it being residential, I would imagine that there's going to be more often conflicts throughout the week. So.
Right.
Michael, did Board of Public Works delay it to the next meeting, or was it sort of an uncertain return by date?
There was no time frame that this is overly pressing or whatever. I do believe it was deferred until the next meeting.
Okay.
It also did not help. Bill Balke was under the weather and was not able to attend or answer any questions. Alder Allen did not appear, nor were there any other interest groups that came to speak on the matter at Public Works. So at that time, we felt we didn't have enough information to make a recommendation.
Okay.
So I don't necessarily have an issue with this specific one, but it sounds like, since, Andrew, what you were just talking about, and I assume that this ordinance might be the reason why you added that agenda item about the parking ordinance.
Exactly.
So yeah, they're certainly related. So since we're planning to clean up the parking ordinances anyway, would your recommendation be to wait on this, or is there any harm in passing this with knowing that we will kind of clean up our ordinances in the near future? I don't know. I want to hear your take on this
Sure.
specific
So-
resolution.
When I heard the two separate residents, ask about this, talk about this concern and bring this to our attention, I kind of responded to both of them that it's our intention to kind of do an overhaul of the ordinance and include this one, basically clean it up, similar to Seminole Highway to Sub-Zero Parkway, to try to clean up these, apparent disconnections. In this particular case, folks felt like it was important to get this solved now, as early as possible, so that folks didn't, assume that they could park there for longer, and have an issue later. So I think that was the urgency with this one of why it kind of went ahead. And so, I was planning on including this one, similar to other bike lanes, in ordinance with the larger overhaul, but this one, folks felt like was more important. So.
When you do that ordinance cleanup in the near future, will part of that be repealing the parts of the ordinances that are duplicative or duplicative?
Yeah.
So theoretically, we could pass this, which would require maybe putting up signage in the near future, and very soon we will probably incorporate this into the ordinance update anyway. And we would then repeal this, but I don't know. It's just a matter of this happening sooner rather than later.
Does the way it work, because you just had the list of all the things that are no parking, right? That's in like the ordinance, it's just like the
Yep.
list of all the areas. So this would just get added to the list. Is the plan to then just say like, please reference the parking map, like for that giant list, and then you would get rid of that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so we would remove those 34 or potentially 35 individual items and say reference the, official traffic map parking section, that sort of thing. And then that one would just be represented, and it would definitely be represented on that map versus maybe potentially to be debated, right, if that makes sense. And there's a few that I'll note that are currently in ordinance but are in conflict with each other, so those would also probably be cleaned up during this process. But by and large, we're kind of assuming that whatever is in there now will kind of be transitioned to the new one unless there's conflicts.
Question. Your memo says, staff agrees that this location should have parking prohibition with official traffic signs. However, staff does not recommend curb be painted yellow. Is that in the ordinance, or is that just an aside, or is there a reason that we have to worry about that question?
That was included in the ordinance, I believe, the last section, and to paint the existing curb yellow to further
okay.
indicate this action.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and mainly, it was just that's purely from a maintenance standpoint.
So an amendment we could offer would be to strike that, to omit that, consistent with your recommendation to not have to put up no parking signs, but not paint the curb yellow.
Yep, that's correct.
And you sounds like you would like that, because you learned from bitter experience that it's hard to get the yellow off.
Yeah, it certainly can be. I mean, it leads to some pitting of the curb, the
Okay.
curb heads. I'd like to avoid that if all possible.
All right. So anyway, I'm not hearing a proposal to do
Well,
it.
so I'll make that motion. I'll make a motion to strike paint the existing curb yellow.
Okay,
Assuming
is
the signs will be added, right, just to
That's
clarify.
correct. Yep.
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded to drop the yellow painting of the curb, or to amend the ordinance to strike that. All in favor, or is there any discussion of that? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None opposed, so we are offering that amendment. And I don't know if it's a matter of formal process that we actually amend an ordinance. I think our place in this process is to include that recommendation. I mean, I can't remember, do we send actually?
So I'll report that we made an amendment, but how I typically operate when I don't think I will be presenting this. I believe Dave Herbst, as Public Works representative, will be presenting this.
Okay.
When there's an amendment that hasn't been passed by all committees, I typically just offer the original, and then we can consider the amendment as a council for inclusion
Okay,
or
okay.
exclusion.
Right.
So it won't be, technically, if I was gonna move this, I could move it with the amendment from the outset, but I probably wouldn't do that, just so that we could have a separate discussion about it.
And if it is passed, that specific section will be added to the referral sheet from, actions taken on referral. So they'll always have that reference.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
And I just had a comment too about the ordinance. I found it odd that no place in this ordinance does it refer to Oregon Road except in the title. It just seems like somewhere in there it ought to say, besides in the title, it ought to specify the location.
Yeah, I do find this referral
Yeah.
sheet strange. On the page prior, it does actually say, the page right before the ordinance, the actual text of the ordinance, it's page 27 of the packet, page
Yeah.
4, it says specifically, I believe, what's going to be added to the ordinance,
That's
which
correct,
is
yep.
section 35, or part 35, on the east and west sides of Oregon Road, from Rimrock Road to Novation Parkway.
So
That will be added to
so-
the
so
part of the ordinance.
That's the only thing that specifically changes in the ordinance. And then I think the ordinance text on the next page just kind of offers some explanation and direction.
Direct staff.
Wow, it seems like an odd format to me. I would have thought the ordinance would have, this little language would be in the ordinance.
Right.
But anyway, for my part, I agree with the idea, and I find the language of the ordinance confusing.
And I think for that, I mean, I'm not, at this point, if we're gonna be redoing this, Andrew, you know, I think having that consistency moving forward would be great to have in place before, you know, we would really start kind of taking a look at individual sections of everything. You know, would this area, do you have any sense of if this area is just, you know, maybe 2-hour parking is permitted because it's near apartment buildings and maybe somebody needs to drop off groceries closest to their door? I mean, those are the sorts of things that I look at both at Public Works and at this meeting. Again, Alder Allen was not able to join us, which is fine. But there really aren't very many, there aren't members of the public that are showing up to address this. And that always makes me wonder, how big of a deal is this actually, to spend staff time, staff effort, put signs up for somebody who's maybe just parking there for an hour or two. I have no idea if that person is parked there all the time, and if that's the same car we saw in both pictures, both in winter and in summer, or if that is, you know, just something that, you know, somebody was doing out of convenience, and because it's an apartment building, maybe they've got visitors that are coming in a side door. Maybe it's somebody who, you know, we don't necessarily know, but maybe they have trouble getting up and down stairs, or maybe there's something going on in the parking lot. Who knows? Which is why having public input into this really weighs quite heavily. But without that public input, I don't feel like we should be making this amendment or this ordinance go through without having the specifics of what the ordinance is going to be, and then maybe carving some of those things out.
I will just note, I think that's a good point. I will just note that this area of town, the vast majority of people do not have access to a car. It's heavily public transit and I assume bike as well. So in terms of a Public Works meeting in the evening and people attending, people just might not be able to attend a meeting like that.
Sure.
Yeah.
I was also, like, I was by there, and, like, that section of the road, if I was gonna stop off at Artisan Village, that's not where, like, you can pull into it, and there's designated parking for specific apartments that you can park in, and there's also Novation Parkway has a ton of parking on it that would give you better access to that. Because, like, along that road is the retention pond for the development, and so, like, that's a big chunk of it that you're driving past. So it's, if I was gonna, like, run into something and drop something off, that's not necessarily where I would go.
And I guess just my personal opinion, I know that the two alders from the district, or I guess, is this technically part of Fitchburg right now?
This is, yeah.
Okay. So the two alders for this district brought it forward. To a certain extent, I do trust when the alders bring something forward that that's something that is desired by the district. But I do respect that Public Works might have a kind of a process in terms of how you approach things. But I think for my purposes, I personally think this is okay to pass at this time. And I assume that if Board of Public Works wants to reconsider, we might have to push it on council, but that also doesn't seem like a huge deal to me, so. I'm happy, I'm gonna support this, that's all to say that.
Okay, anyway, the motion on the floor that we're debating still is to approve this as written, except striking the yellow curbs business. Mike, did you want to alter that? Do you want to make a motion to defer or anything like that?
Nope.
Okay. All right. Hearing no further discussion, all those in favor of approving ordinance 2022-021 with a suggestion to remove the painting of the curb yellow, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those saying no? All those,
Opposed?
you opposed, Mike? Okay. And I honestly don't know. I guess I'm just supposed to vote like everybody else. So, yeah, I'm gonna, I'll vote aye to get this rolling. Okay, done with that. Brings us to report from the department, item 9.
Yeah, and I'm sorry if this didn't get included in the packet. I will share my screen. So the only thing I had from the minutes from specific request is the schedule of CIP and budget. And unfortunately, I'm sure if Gabriella was there last time, she would have been, ready to go, just throwing this for us. But this I included in the minutes. I also included it here. And this is specifically, I think the request was in reference to making sure the senior center shuttle and potentially other intra-city transit could be incorporated in next year's budget according to this schedule. I think that was kind of the intention of why we would need this. So I'm just kind of offering that.
Okay,
And I do believe tomorrow the CIP list comes out.
Yes,
To
the
the
mayor's
public-
proposed
the mayor's
CIP will come out
proposed,
tomorrow.
that's
So-
what it says on there, yep.
So that would be, I guess, the next step in this process and what is included in that, and then any comments or anything like that at the next meeting.
And the next, just looking at for the budget, the next step in the budget is, I'm looking at June 14th, worksheets distributed to departments, so there's still a lot of internal department discussions going on about.
Yeah,
To
we
develop
haven't
the
even
proposed
started
budget,
the
yeah.
on the operating side yet.
Okay.
I mean, I haven't, maybe other people have.
There won't be any public, basically, input until the document is released, which I believe is September 23rd. So there's staff work on that front, and the mayor will be working on it as well in collaboration with staff. But in terms of committee members weighing in, the public weighing in, that won't start until the 23rd when the document is released to the
Okay.
public.
Okay. Any other comments under report from department?
Oh,
Andrew?
yeah. A couple other things. Grant applications, so I'll zoom in on this so they can see. Yeah, so staff, submitted 4 grant applications for STP urban funding, 3 corridor projects, so that South Sayin, basically this phase 2, kind of picking up where we left off and then moving north up to the limits of the federal HISIP project. Sayin, then from McCoy north to the city limits, and then Irish Lane from Fish Hatchery Road over to South Sayin. So those 3 were basically reconstruction / reconditionings. A lot of names for the same, similar stuff, but with bike lanes, all of them. So those were all submitted. We should hear back in late July, early August. Also submitted was one of the CIP projects was to include ARPA funding for bus stop improvements, one of which would be transit shelters. So specifically knowing that, that could be the kind of the catalyst to changing other amenities, we submitted for 8 transit shelters, so basically trying to get federal match to our ARPA funding.
And what is STP urban funding?
Yeah, so now I'm forgetting.
Is this a state fund
let's
or?
see. I don't want to. Surface Transportation Program. There you go. So that is
Federal funds.
Yeah, it's federal funds administered through the state. And
So
so,
are they-
that's an 80-20 split.
City pays 20, the feds pay 80, and is this, are these likely to be approved, or is this?
It's unknown, I would say. So for metro areas in Wisconsin, the MPO ranks projects according to a criteria they set up. So they set up their own criteria on how they score, which is based on volumes, bike level traffic stress, safety, a number of other, they have maps specific to equity and to regional and employment centers. So there's a lot of components that go into this. I would think that the transit shelters and the South Sain Phase 2 have a pretty good chance. I'm not sure about the other one. But we felt like it was worth applying because that's the only way you can find out.
Okay, definitely.
I have a question. I know that the Wayland Road bike lanes were talked about as part of the ARPA process.
Mhm.
Is there potential for applying for funding for that in the future? Obviously, we have to make decisions about what's higher priority, but is there a reason why the Wayland Road wasn't included?
Yeah, so I believe that those are basically add-ons, so it's like widening shoulders versus a full reconstruction. And so that could be possible. This urban fund goes to the urban growth boundary, so Wayland Road being south of that. That would, I think qualify for the STP local fund, grant funding. And I know that was quite competitive when we applied for the 2022 funding cycle. So I think that the general consensus was there might not be much potential in that program in the near term, but if that continues, that could be a great source. Basically, there's urban, rural, and local, and so we don't have a lot of great candidates in the rural section just because it needs to be a more major road. But in the local section, we do have several candidates, Wayland being one of those. But I think just because that project is a kind of scab on of not a full reconstruct, I think that's why we didn't consider applying to the STP local this time. But it
Okay.
still is included as a CIP project potentially. You know.
So these would possibly be funded that way, otherwise they won't happen.
Some of them would still, but maybe at a lesser degree or maybe with more, local funding. So
Okay.
I think the hope is to try to get as much grant funding as possible.
Okay, okay. So are these things that might show up then also in the CIP?
Yes. Well, the South Sain and the Sain are already in the CIP. Irish is
Oh.
being added to,
Okay,
being staff proposed in the CIP for 2023.
okay,
And similarly for the transit shelters. And,
okay, thank you.
yeah, so next is MM McCoy. And so, I just want everybody to know progress is continuing. I think they're looking to do a traffic shift next week. So we're already getting into 3 of 5, so making good progress. And because the bids came in too high on some sanitary sewer work, it might actually abbreviate the schedule a little bit more. So that end of July is really looking reasonable this time. So. North Fitzgerald Road, so, generally speaking, the final contract work is completed. There's still a little bit of pavement marking, and some storm sewer was cracked, and so they have to basically put a liner. So you'll see a giant truck there that later this summer putting in a liner. But by and large, the Fitzgerald Road contract work is generally done. So the next time we'll really get out there is after Labor Day for warranty work. So things that, plantings and curbs that were cracked and the like, that, we have kind of one more
Andrew?
crack at. Yeah.
Can you make a note when that project is, when the costs are done for that project, can you make a note to bring that to the board and do a quick little spiel on planned versus actual, see where we came in on that one?
Sure. Yeah, the actual is a little bit easier than the plan, because I think that was a kind of a moving target, right? It started somewhere, and then at a basic reconstruction, I think it kind of quickly changed. But certainly I could give you kind of the how it evolved and what the final was. Yeah. And that should be probably by next month, now that the final contract work is done. We'll still have things like the care cycle, so our plants have a 2-year care cycle, and so when they come out, they'll just be billing us for that care cycle. So there'll still be some costs incurred over the next 2 years, but
Yeah,
by and large, the project's done.
we're not talking adding another $1 million on top of it, right?
Right. And we are under budget, though, in context to the last budget set, which was significantly higher than the first budget set. So.
There were several increases
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
budget in the lead up to the final, long before I was on council. But
And then South Sain, we did get that construction bid. We received those. unfortunately, just the way schedules worked out, we weren't in time to get this referred to TTC, so it'll go to Board of Public Works and be approved by council at the end of this month. So that's the plan, as well as the construction engineering. So it was a little bit higher than we anticipated, 5.8 million versus, I think we looked at 5.2 million. But, you know, in knowing that everything is hyperinflation and, you know, that's probably not going to change anytime soon, I think the city considers that that's pretty good.
Okay, thank you. That concludes the report from the department. Announcements. Are there any announcements?
Actually, Andrew, one question.
Okay.
Where are we at with Lacey Road? Are we in jeopardy of not getting that moving this year? And if so, has there been given any thought into bringing this back and looking at the actual footprint that would maybe reduce the need for land acquisition?
That's a good question. So, although I don't think we have an official council, you know, reaffirmed response on that, I think realistically, there's not a great likelihood of it getting built this year, as I kind of mentioned in the past, right? And specifically, I think it was already a tight schedule, and as I mentioned, real estate acquisitions, you know, more challenging than we thought. Specifically, there's, you know, the stormwater facilities, roughly 6 acres located on Promega's land, and so we're working with them on kind of what they need from their land, making sure that it's consistent, you know, that the city's getting what they want, and we're not, you know, causing an undue burden on the property owner. And that isn't particularly affected by the footprint of the corridor. That's really the stormwater ponds and the locations where it makes the most sense to put them, knowing that really the end place for that water to go is that kettle or wetland scrape. So so to answer your question, yes, we are in grave jeopardy of not being able to do it this year. In fact, I would say it's very, very likely that we would do it next, start construction next spring. And changing the design won't really affect that.
Won't what?
Won't really affect that. I don't think.
What are the problems with the land acquisition?
Yeah, so basically the city, you know, has a real estate specialist that we retain for these projects. They, you know, he hires an appraiser. That appraiser appraises the land necessary to complete the transportation project. There's a large disconnect between what the appraiser came in with and what the second appraisal that was, you know, hired by Promega, what they came in at.
No.
And so that large discrepancy we're kind of working through. I think particularly it has to do with, you know, cutting off access to the remainder of that land.
Is this land that the city is planning to acquire through eminent domain, or is it you're still trying to work out a amicable?
Yeah, we're still trying to work out a fair price, and mainly just trying to work through the details of how does Promega, you know, retain access to that land while the city is still having the stormwater easements and kind of necessary stormwater ponds to treat the water coming off the road. So I won't. It's complicated and potentially sensitive, but I don't believe, at this point, I don't have any cause to think that we won't be able to construct next year. It's just going to take some time to work through those details.
Okay, okay, thank you. Michael, did you want to add anything on that, on your point?
Not at all.
All right. That concludes.
Oh, and I was gonna.
Announcements.
Gabrielle has one, and I also have one more. after
Okay.
she's done.
Yeah, so I just wanted to give you an update about the transit redesign, what happened at council, which was on May 24th, so several weeks ago. We looked at the transit plan and the network redesign, which you guys considered at the last meeting. And so we passed all of the amendments that were included in the resolution. save for the route through Southdale that was changed to weave more into the city. So what was originally proposed was just bring it one block in off of Rimrock Road. The council amended the amendment to go actually loop into Southdale. And that passed unanimously. There was like over an hour of testimony from the residents that came out to speak about the importance of the bus route. And then the other ones you looked at, there's the change to the DT route. There's a change to a couple changes to the Z route, one of which that's in the city of Fitchburg, one of which that is in the city of Madison. Yeah, and so I believe those are all the amendments. That was the city of Fitchburg. The next step was to go to the Transportation and Policy Planning Board, which it went so there was a public hearing last week on Monday, which I attended. A lot of the residents in Southdale attended to advocate for in Madison, it's the Amendment 16C. So they were advocating for that. Myself and Alder Allen both came to advocate for all the Fitchburg amendments. Alder Udell is actually on that committee. There's very few members from outside of the city of Madison on it, but there are some.
This is a committee of Metro?
It's a Madison committee. I guess it's a regional committee. It's the Transportation and Policy Planning Board.
Okay.
But I think it's mostly made up of Madison individuals, and I think Alder Udell's the only
I
one
think
that's
he's the
from.
greater Madison.
Yeah, he's like the one
Sure, yeah.
outsider from
Good
it.
for
So
him. Good.
that was a public hearing last week. They met this past Monday.
Yeah.
And they passed all of the Fitchburg amendments that passed at council. Now, to be honest, that wasn't super surprising just because the vast majority of the monetary expense of those amendments fall to the city of Fitchburg. So I see no reason why Madison would stand in the way of those amendments, especially since Metro staff figured out how to, really it's just a matter of making the transit system work as a whole, right? So that passed, and I believe the next step is it goes to Madison City Council. Now, there is a lot of controversy. You may have heard about it, that
In
a
Madison.
lot of, throughout neighborhoods all over, similar to kind of the outpouring from Southdale. That's happening all over the city of Madison. There have been discussions about slowing down the process. I don't know how feasible that is, but at this point, it continues to move forward. I think it's very likely that all the Fitchburg amendments that passed council on May 24th will be part of the final network.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that happened on Tuesday. I think the public hearing was last week.
Oh, did it go to
I think-
Madison already?
I think Monday was the policy
Yes.
transportation.
Oh, and then it did go to,
Yeah.
And I went to
I think
council on
they
Tuesday.
passed. I think I saw it in the paper.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yep, so I
Well,
think we're all
I'm
passed.
behind,
and-
I'm behind,
think
I'm behind the times. Okay, great.
Yep.
So, well, I mean, it's going to be a challenge to take a look at that in the budget this year, but I think that the whole council, it was a unanimous decision from the council, so.
I think the next steps I heard from Metro were bus stop locations and service planning. I think they definitely have a interest in, our willingness to show up at meetings this summer to kind of get the word out of what these changes are, especially as we get more of these specifics that people want.
And I do think the outreach is going to be key. And I've talked about that all along, but I think now that we're heading towards finality, it needs to be nothing but outreach to the neighbors things are changing for them.
And my last short announcement,
Yeah.
more on a personal note, so I'm taking a job at UW TOPS Lab and
At where?
at the UW TOPS Lab, and I'll be leaving next month. So
Oh.
the next TTC meeting will be my last meeting.
Well, we'll miss you. Now, where are you going to work? Where? The UW what?
The TOPS Lab, Transportation Operations and Safety,
Okay.
or traffic operations. Yeah.
It's a University of
Yeah.
Wisconsin
Yeah.
position. Well, congratulations, I assume, to you.
Thank you.
You will be totally at sea and lost now, but
I don't think so. I think you guys got it. But it's been a pleasure serving on this committee. And I hope, I believe that Anna Bijak will be joining us
Okay.
between now and then. And my hope is that to bring her there to kind of have the
okay.
transition.
But you'll be here next time.
Yep.
She might be with you,
Correct.
and then will she be the?
I'm not
Ongoing?
sure yet.
So did you announce that at the last meeting? I'm sorry, I forgot.
No.
Yeah, because Anna Bijak's the new Assistant Director of Public Works.
Okay.
And she's the former transportation engineer.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
So she's very knowledgeable about this
Okay.
committee and past.
Okay.
So,
Good.
We
Good.
lucked out on that front, but.
for sure.
Well, good luck down on campus.
Thanks.
And that, I think, unless there's some other announcements, I'll be looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
A second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, we are adjourned.